Good day, everyone. Today we will discuss about communicating in teams and organization. Shown on the screen are the list of what we are about to learn in this chapter. To start, let us first define communication. Communication refers to the process by which information is transmitted and understood between two or more people. Here we emphasize the word understood because transmitting the sender's intended meaning is the essence of good communication. As we all know, effective communication is vital to all organizations, so much so that no company could exist without it. And here are the following reasons. First, people can work interdependently only through communication. Communication is the vehicle through which people clarify their expectations and coordinate work, which allows them to achieve organizational objectives more effectively and efficiently. Second, communication is also an important instrument for organizational learning and decision making. One perspective of organizational effectiveness is organizational learning, which is the firm's capacity to acquire, share, use, and store valuable information. This process depends on various forms of communication. Effective communication minimizes hoarding of knowledge, but rather promotes distribution of it throughout the organization. The third importance of communication is that it aids employees' well-being. Information communicated from coworkers helps employee manage their work environment, telling them, for instance, how to complete work procedures correctly or handle difficult customers. It is important also to take note that communicating with others is an important means through which individuals validate their self-worth and maintain their social identity. The fourth reason is that communication promotes motivation. By informing and clarifying the employees about the task to be done, the manner they are performing the task, and how to improve their performance if it is not up to the mark. Lastly, lastly, communication also assists in the controlling process. It helps in controlling organizational members' behavior. There are various levels of hierarchy and certain principles and guidelines that employees must follow in an organization. They must comply with organizational policies, perform their job role efficiently, and communicate any work problems and grievances to their superiors. Thus, communication helps in controlling functions of management. Next, we will discuss the communication process model as shown on the screen. This provides a useful metaphor for thinking about the communication process. According to this model, communication flows through channels between the sender and the receiver. The sender forms a message and encodes it into words, gestures, voice intonation, and other symbols or signs. Next, the encoded message is transmitted to the intended receiver through one or more communication channel or media. The receiver senses the incoming message and decodes it into something meaningful. Ideally, the decoded message is what the sender had intended. In most situations, the sender looks for evidence that the other person received and understood the transmitted message. This feedback may be formal acknowledgement, such as, "Yes, I know what you mean," or indirect evidence of the receiver's subsequent actions. Notice that feedback repeats the communication process. Intended feedback is encoded, transmitted, received, and decoded from the receiver to the sender of the original message. This model recognizes that communication is not a free flowing conduct. Rather, the transmission of meaning from one person to another is hampered by noise, the psychological, social, and structural barrier that distorts and obscures the sender's intended message. If any part of the communication process is distorted or broken, the sender and receiver will not have a common understanding of the message. The next topic that we will discuss is the factors that influence the effectiveness of the encoding and decoding process. The first is the sender's and receiver's ability and motivation to communicate through the communication channel. Some people communicate better through face to face conversation and prefer using this type of communication channel. Others are awkward in conversation, yet are quite good at communicating via text messages or other similar technologies. Generally, the encoding decoding process is more effective when both parties are skilled at using the selected communication channel and enjoy using the channel. The second factor is the extent to which both parties have similar codebooks. It refers to the dictionaries of symbols, language, gestures, idioms, and other tools used to convey information. With similar codebooks, the communication participants are able to encode and decode more accurately because they both have tools with the same and similar meaning. Communication efficiency also improves because there is less need for redundancy and less need for confirmation feedbacks. The third factor influencing the encoding decoding process effectiveness is the extent to which both parties have shared mental models about the topic's content. Mental models are the internal representation of the external world that allows us to visualize elements of setting and relationships among those elements. When sender and receiver have shared mental models, they have a common understanding of the environment relating to the information. So less communication is necessary to clarify meaning about the context. And lastly is the sender's experience at communicating the message. As people become more familiar with the subject matter, they develop more efficient and colorful language to describe the subject. In other words, they become more proficient at using the code books of symbols to convey the message. This is similar to the effect of job training or sports practice. The more practice and experience gained at communicating a subject, the more people learn how to effectively transmit the information to others. Now, let us discuss computer mediated communication. 2 decades ago, computer mediated communication was a novel development. Today, it seems that many of us rely more on computer channels than on old fashioned options. By far, the most widely used of this is electronic mail, or what we know as email, which has improved the way we communicate in organizational settings. Email has become the medium of choice in most workplaces, and here are the reasons why. First, messages from email are quickly written, edited, and transmitted. Second, information can be appended and conveyed to many people with a simple click of a mouse. Third, email is asynchronous, meaning messages are sent and received from different times, so there is no need to coordinate a communication session. Fourth, email software has become an efficient filing cabinet. And fourth, employees increasingly rely on email to filter, store, sort, and search messages and attachment far more quickly than possible with paper-based memos. Number 6, it often increases the volume of communication. Number 7, it significantly alters the flow of information within the groups and throughout the organization. Number 8, it reduces some face to face and telephone communication, which saves a lot of time. And number 9, it increases communication with people farther up in the hierarchy. And number 10, it hides age, race, and other features of the sender, which means email reduces stereotype biases. After pinpointing the benefits of email, we already know that it is so wonderful in so many ways, but it does have its limitation. The first one is it is a poor medium for communicating emotions. People rely on facial expressions and other nonverbal cues to interpret the emotional meaning of the words. Email lacks this parallel communication channel. Senders try to clarify the emotional tone of their message by using expressive languages. However, this doesn't represent the desired emotion. These actions help, but they do not replace the full complexity of the real facial expression, voice intonation, and hand movements. The second problem with email is that it reduces politeness and respect. Email messages are often less diplomatic than written letters because individual can post email messages before their emotions subside. Also, email has low social presence or more impersonal, so people are more likely to write things that would never be spoken in face-to-face conversation. Another issue with email is that it is a poor medium for ambiguous, complex, and novel situations. Email is usually fine for well defined situations, such as giving a basic instruction or presenting a meeting agenda, but it can be cumbersome in ambiguous, complex, and novel situations. For these situations, require communication channels that transmit a larger volume of information with more rapid feedbacks. In other words, when the issue gets messy, stop emailing and start talking, preferably face to face. And lastly, email contributes to information overload. The email glut occurs because messages are created and copied to many people without much effort. The number of email messages will probably decrease as people become more familiar with it. But to date, email volume continues to rise. To reduce email overload and encourage more face to face interaction, some firms now have days when email is banned. Now let us move on to social network communication. Although email still likely remains the most popular medium, social networking sites such as Facebook, MySpace, and Instagram, and others are rapidly becoming part of the popular culture. University students even rate Facebook as the second most in thing because these technologies allow people to form communities around friendship, common interest, expertise, and other themes, resulting to closer interaction in the communication experience. Indeed, many social networking technologies gain value as more people participate in this technology. However, a large number of companies have banned employees to access social networking sites after discovering that staff spend too much time looking at the site. Yes, recognizing the popularity of social networking technology, a few organizational leaders are experimenting with ways to use it as conduct for employees to communicate productively with each other, as well as with customers and other external stakeholders.
Two ways of communication: nonverbal communication and verbal communication. Upon hearing these words, we already had an idea what is the meaning of this. Nonverbal communication is facial gestures, voice intonation, physical distance, and even silence. This communication channel is necessary when noise or physical distance prevents effective verbal exchanges. Verbal communication, it is the ability to communicate using words. It is the use of sounds and words to express yourself, especially in contrastive gestures or mannerisms. Nonverbal and verbal communication differs in a couple ways. First, it is less rule-bound than verbal communication. We receive plenty of formal training on how to understand spoken words, but very little on understanding the nonverbal signals that accompany those words. Second is the other difference between verbal and nonverbal communication is that the former is typically conscious, whereas most nonverbal communication is automatic and non-conscious. We normally plan the words we say or write, but we rarely plan every blink, smile, or other gestures during a conversation. Communication channels. There are two types of communication channels. First is social acceptance. Social acceptance refers to how well communication medium is approved and supported by the organization, teams, and individuals. Three factors of social acceptance. First is norms. Norms is a guideline or an expectation for behavior. Norms partly explain why telephone conversations are more common among staff in some firms. whereas email or instant messaging is the common choice in other organizations. Second is individual preferences. If a specific likes and dislikes upon individual human, you may have discovered that a coworker prefers email rather than a voicemail, or wants to meet in person more than they think is necessary. These preferences are due to personality traits as well as previous experience and reinforcement with particular channels. Third is symbolic meaning, are viewed as impersonal whereas others are more personal. Some are considered professional whereas others are casual. Some are cool whereas others are not. The second type of communication channel is medium richness. A medium data carrying capacity, that is the volume and variety of information that can be transmitted during a specific time. Face-to-face communication is at the top of media richness because it allows us to communicate both verbally and non-verbally at the same time, to receive feedback almost immediately from the receiver. Choosing the wrong medium reduces communication effectiveness. Media richness hierarchy. From rich medium, overloaded zone, medium provides too much data carrying capacity. This is face-to-face video conference or telephone. The lean medium or oversimplified zone, medium provides too little data carrying capacity, which is instant messaging, web blogs, email, newsletters, and financial statements. Evaluating media richness theory. There are three factors of media richness. First is the ability to multi-communicate. It is usually difficult as well as sure to communicate with someone while simultaneously transmitting messages to someone else by using another medium. Although people do not multitask as efficiently as is often believed. But some employees have become good enough at multi-communicating. Second is more varied proficiency level. Communication effectiveness is partially determined by the sender's competency with the communication channel. People with higher proficiency can push more information through the channel, thereby increasing the channel's information flow. The third factor is social distraction of rich channels. Channels with high media richness tend to involve more direct social interaction. In other words, the benefits of media richness channels such as face-to-face communication may be offset by social distraction from the message's content, whereas lean media have much less social presence. For communication barriers, imperfect perceptual process. As receivers, we don't listen as well as senders assume we do, and our needs and expectations influence what we get noticed and ignored. We aren't any better as senders either. Some studies suggest that we have difficulty stepping out of our own perspective and stepping into the perspective of others. So we overestimate how well other people understand the message we are communicating. Second is language differences. Even if two people speak the same language, they might have different meanings for particular words and phrases. Third is jargon, which includes specialized words and phrases for specific occupations or groups. Is designed to improve communication efficiency. However, it has the opposite effect when senders transmit jargon to people who do not possess the jargon code. Last is noise. Communication noise refers to influences on effective communication that influence the interpretation of conversation. While often looked over, communication noise can have profound impact both on our perception of interaction with others and our analysis of our own communication profession. And that's the end of my report. Next will be our Dadivas. Thank you.
Next, we will discuss gender differences in communication. Men and women have similar communication practices, but there are subtle distinctions that can occasionally lead to misunderstanding and conflict. First, men engage in more report talk, in which the primary function of the conversation is impersonal and efficient information exchange.
Women also do report talk, particularly when conversing with men, but conversations among women have a higher incidence of relationship building through rapport talk. Women make more use of indirect requests, apologize more often, and seek advice from others more quickly than do men. Women are more sensitive than men to nonverbal cues in face-to-face meetings. Together, these conditions can create communication conflicts. Women are more of the "do you think you should?" while men are the "you should do this." They assert their power by directly giving advice to others and using combative language. Improving interpersonal communication. Effective interpersonal communication depends on the sender's ability to get the message across and the receiver's performance as an active listener. So in this section, we outline these two essential features, the getting your message across. To accomplish this difficult task, the sender must learn to empathize with the receiver, repeat the message, choose an appropriate time for the conversation, and be descriptive rather than evaluative. And then next, active listening. It has three components: um, the sensing, evaluating, and responding. These reflect the listener's side of the communication model. Getting your message across. Effective communication occurs when the other person receives and understands the message. First is empathize. When we say empathy, it is a person's ability to understand and be sensitive to the feelings, thoughts, and situations of others. So in conversations, this involves putting yourself in the receiver's shoes when encoding. Second, repeat the message. Rephrase the key points a couple of times. Use timing differently. Your message competes with other messages and noise. And lastly, be descriptive. Focus on the problem, not the person. If you have negative information to convey, people stop listening when the information attacks their self-esteem. Also, suggest things the listener can do to improve rather than point to him or her as a problem. Active listening. Listening is a process of actively sensing the sender's signals, evaluating them accurately, and responding appropriately. Sensing. It is the process of receiving signals from the sender and paying attention to them. Active listeners improve sensing in three ways. First, they postpone evaluation by not forming an opinion until the speaker has finished. Second, they avoid interrupting the speaker's conversation. Third, they remain motivated to listen to the speaker. Evaluating includes understanding the message's meaning, evaluating the message, and remembering the message. To improve their evaluation of the conversation, active listeners empathize with the speaker. They try to understand and be sensitive to the speaker's feelings, thoughts, and situation. Responding is giving feedback to the sender, thereby motivating and directing the speaker's communication. Active listeners accomplish this by maintaining sufficient eye contact and sending back channel signals, example, "I see," both of which show interest. They also respond by clarifying the message, rephrasing the speaker's ideas and appropriate breaks. Example, "So you're saying that choo choo choo." So here we have the active listening process. Active listeners constantly cycle through sensing, evaluating, and responding during the conversation and engage in various activities to improve these processes. Next is improving communication throughout the hierarchy. Corporate leaders also need to maintain an open flow of communication up, down, and across the organization. So in this section, we discuss three communication strategies. First is workplace design. Second is web-based communication. And third, direct communication with top management. Workplace design. So an example is Japan Airlines. They decided that knocking down a few walls might reverse the airline's recent financial woes. The airline's board members and senior executive team moved out of individual offices into a single large room where it is easier for them to spontaneously share information. The new space also includes an elliptical conference table at which they can hold meetings. Japan Airlines executives have discovered that people communicate more with each other when there are no walls between them. Next is web-based organizational communication. For decades, employees received official company news through hard copy newsletters and magazines. Many firms still use these communication devices, but most have supplemented or in PDF format. Direct communication with top management. Senior executives will understand their business rather better if they meet directly with employees and other stakeholders. These direct communication strategies potentially minimize filtering because executives listen directly to employees. They also help executives acquire a deeper meaning and quicker understanding of internal organizational problems. A third benefit of direct communication is that employees might have more empathy for decisions made further up the corporate hierarchy. Communicating through the grapevine. First, we define what grapevine is. Grapevine is an unstructured and informal network founded on social relationships rather than organizational charts or job descriptions. Next, we identify its characteristics. First, it transmits information very rapidly in all directions. Second, typical pattern is cluster chain. Third, works through informal social networks. Some of its benefits include employees rely on the grapevine when information is not available through formal channels. The main conduit through which organizational stories and other symbols of the organization's culture are communicated. This social interaction relieves anxiety, and it is associated with the drive to bond. Its limitations include it is not a preferred communication medium, sometimes so distorted that it escalates rather than reduces employee anxiety, and employees develop more negative attitudes toward the organization when management is lower than the grapevine in communicating information. So that ends our presentation. Thank you for listening.